of the Seven Oceans, or at least that is the English translation of this Indonesian horror movie, directed by Tommy Dewo. I believe this is his feature directorial debut. And the movie kind of takes place over a number of years, starting from the 1970s, where they actually say, and then they kind of age the characters up, which doesn't actually say the year, but I'm assuming it's probably mid to late 80s. And the story focuses on this family of people who, the father has a like a shop in this somewhat busy market town, and there seems to be rivalries within this kind of market town where people try to one-up each other. And we learn that there is a somewhat back and forth between people putting curses on one another to, you know, get them to fail in their business or get their businesses to kind of prosper and things like this. And this causes kind of like an escalation in the stakes. At the same time, the eldest son of this family has a kind of sixth sense where he is able to see spirits, and he can kind of see the world beyond, so to speak. And there's a kind of a local shaman who limits this, so we can only see spirits that want to be seen, but there are other spirits that are deliberately hidden and things like this. And as the movie goes on, the stakes raise, the kind of the rivalries become deadly. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So what's it got to do with the oceans? Not much, let me just say. But let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. This movie is surprisingly brutal. There is some very painful and quite shocking deaths in this movie. All the way through a child getting cut in half, through nails coming through women's necks and things like that. And the camera does not cut away. I mean, the gore is quite plentiful in some respects. I mean, it's not like a movie where it's a gore shot every few minutes, but there is a reasonable amount of sequences where people are coming under the influence of these demonic curses and stuff and end up, you know, in a bloody fashion. So there's a reasonable amount, and when we do see them, they are, as I say, at least the idea is pretty brutal. I mean, the effects are achieved a lot through a mix of practical and CGI, and the CGI isn't brilliant, but nonetheless, I think the concept is pretty brutal at times, as I say. And no one's kind of like off limits here, so you know it goes pretty hard, you might say. The focus of the movie is kind of on the occult and black magic, or at least the sort of the Indonesian equivalent, I suppose, which makes it somewhat interesting. There is sort of ghosts and there's demons in here, but they generally are either nothing to do with it, or it's are kind of a result of the black magic, which is the kind of the as I say, the main threat. And these sort of curses that are being thrown around are pretty brutal, and they tend to be the kind of the main threat here, which is interesting because I don't feel like you see a lot of like just kind of like magic, right? It's normally a thing, but this is more about the kind of like actual sort of magic and actually like curses coming to fruition and sort of spells and stuff, rather than a creature or a ghost or something like that. Although they, as I say, they do appear in this movie. So I think that's an interesting sort of concept here. One of the things that I think is a positive and negative is that this really stems from something quite trivial. So it's like the pettiness of man. I mean, we're talking about a high street in Indonesia in the sort of the 80s and the 70s where people are jealous about someone else's business success. And that's the impetus for this kind of escalation in magic use. So it's petty. So on the plus side, I got to say, well, no, that really sort of highlights how you know, pettiness some people can be, and the escalation that might come from, you know, something relatively minor that kind of, you know, ends up becoming really kind of quite bad. Look at World War One. So, you know, I thought that was certainly an interesting concept. I mean, I think the downside is it kind of does seem somewhat kind of an overreach and an overreaction. Let's be honest, but nonetheless, it is what it is. This is what sometimes humans are like, I suppose. This being an Indonesian movie, it's obviously not spoken in English, and as such, it's sometimes a little harder to kind of judge the acting and things like that. But I've got to say, I didn't feel like I had any issues necessarily with the performances, at least you're obviously reading the text translations of the speak and stuff like that. So I thought the acting was all okay. And, you know, I felt the movie does have an element of, you're not quite sure what it's going to do in regards to maybe where the plot will end up, because it tries to have a few misdirects here and there, relatively obvious, let me just say. But nonetheless, you still think, well, you know, certain people who you would have assumed might end up, you know, surviving, might not, and vice versa. So it has a little bit of an air of unpredictability. You know, I was relatively engaged in the story, I have to say. You know, I was kind of quite interested to see where it was all going to go, and I think the escalation and the increase of the threat level as the film goes on feels like you are sort of progressing in the story, and the stakes are getting higher as the film progresses. So it kind of draws your attention with it in that respect. So what doesn't work? So one major element in this movie is the idea that the son, the eldest son, has 3 children, can see these ghosts. But I didn't really think it really had anything to do with the story. He sees a bunch of ghosts hanging, and yeah, there's some scary images. I mean, I'm assuming that's maybe the idea. There's just a few sequences where we see these ghosts pop up and they look scary, but they don't really do anything, and they don't really have any impact on the story outside of a couple of scares. And then we have a situation later in the movie where he has to go to 7 points around the coast, hence the title, to achieve a goal. And each of these kind of coastal areas has a supernatural guardian. I thought, okay, these spirits are going to do something. Not really. To be honest, they hang around looking scary and growl and stuff, but not really. We only ever get one sort of supernatural entity that actually does something. So it feels like, okay, why is this even here? Why is this even a storyline? And then even how it's introduced, I had some questions with. The idea being that the eldest son had a serious surgery when he was younger, and the trauma of this surgery basically brings about this gift, so to speak. But then the sister, the sort of middle-aged child, this kind of shaman also goes, oh, you've got it as well, do you want me to activate it? And then, well, the other guy had to have this traumatic event, like this big surgery for it to be sort of noticed. And then this other girl, just like that. Oh yeah, do you want it? Cool. I mean, we'll put some of these on your head now, and it's all good now. So yeah, I think some of the stuff here, I mean, it's obviously folklore that I'm not particularly kind of familiar with. So you know, I'm not critiquing anyone's folklore and stuff. But as it presents in this movie, it seems a little kind of inconsistent. And ultimately, although I was engaged in this story, it becomes, certainly the second half of the movie, is like fetch quests. We've got to go to these 7 points. I mean, it's not exactly the whole movie, but there's a big sequence where it's basically a bunch of fetch quests, and it's relatively easily done without you know, we get some ghosts and some spirits kind of, but they don't do anything. It's like, okay, this seems like treading water for a lot of the time here, to be honest with you. And as I said, it seems odd that this is so sort of spins out of something so mundane, like a rivalry with two different kind of like market traders, and then people are dead, multiple people are dead because of this. And without kind of spoiling anything, you even feel like there's some people who had some culpability that somehow themselves kind of get away with it. And I was like, okay, but innocent people die. Yeah, so it seems that it's a bit of a sort of, okay, maybe it doesn't feel like fully formed, or at least sort of like maybe some would expect. But I gotta say, I still was quite engaged with this movie. And I still liked, even though the effects, as I say, the CGI isn't brilliant. And those of you who are very critical about things like the quality of VFX, maybe put off by the sort of the rudimentary sort of style, you know, I can forgive it. It's not come from like the US. This is relatively, you know, it's a local Indonesian production. It's probably not got a huge budget and stuff like that. So I'm a bit picky. But it's certainly the idea here of this very ambitious kind of death sequences, and they're the best parts of the movie. Really, the most creative. These kind of things where these curses like hit you. It's not the ghosts. It's these when these curses happen. It happens multiple times. You're thinking, ooh, that is harsh beans. Anyway, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.